You're listening to Crashes, Claims, and Clarity, hosted by Darrell Burrow, a Georgia-based personal injury attorney with over 30 years of experience and founder of Burrow and Associates. With a background in both legal strategy and compassionate client care, Darrell has helped over 10,000 individuals and families navigate life after injury. Guided by his Christian faith and a deep sense of justice, he brings expert insight, personal stories, and powerful interviews to every episode. If you're looking for truth, support, and clarity in the aftermath of an accident, this is your place. This is Crashes, Claims, and Clarity.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Crashes, Claims, and Clarity. I am your host, Darrell Burrow. I'm the owner and founder of the law firm of Burrow and Associates. We are headquartered right here in Gwinnett County in Duluth, Georgia. And today I'm very excited about our topic. We're going to talk about work-related injuries, workers' compensation claims. And hopefully you'll be able to glean some very valuable information about these types of cases. If you've ever wondered about these cases, how they're different, what the ins and outs are, where people make mistakes, I really think you're going to be delighted and gain a lot of insight today. I have the pleasure of welcoming Tom Holder. He's a longtime Georgia attorney. He has spent 4 decades representing injured workers in the state of Georgia. He has served in national leadership capacities as the past president of the Workers' Injury Law and Advocacy Group. He was named as the 2020 National Claimants Lawyer of the Year, and he also received the 2022 Distinguished Service Award from the Workers' Compensation section of the State Bar of Georgia. And in addition to this work, Tom is also a mediator, which allows him to bring a unique perspective to these cases to try to get them resolved. Well, Tom, thank you so much for being here. It's a great pleasure to have you.
Happy to be here, Darrell.
All right, we'll launch right in with some questions. You've been doing this a long time, since 1984. Thank you for your service. And over that long career, what are some of the biggest changes you've seen in workers' compensation rules or law, and maybe some of the things that need to change that haven't?
Well, I think that's a question that we could probably take up the rest of our time answering. One thing that I think is a little different is the way we interact with our clients. And I think, like in a lot of business, in a lot of aspects of life, we have much less personal contact with people than we used to. For example, if you were going to buy a shirt, you would go to a store where you might know people who own the store, whereas now you might just order it from an online vendor and never really have a personal interaction. I think it's true in the law also. I think, for example, if somebody had lived, say, 45 minutes away from my office back in the 80s, they would have come into my office, we would have set up a time to meet them, and we would have sat down and had a conversation where I would have been asking them questions and we would have been learning a little bit about each other before we started going forward in the case. Now, nobody wants to drive 45 minutes to have a meeting with their attorney. Everything is done online. And I think that sometimes you have a little less personal interaction. I think it's a little harder in terms of establishing a relationship with your client, which with like workers' comp cases can take a very long time, depending on the severity of the injuries. And I think I think it's a negative, but people want things to be done quickly. They want to sign up. I'm hired by people that don't even really know me. So that sometimes is a little tricky. So I think that's one change. Obviously, the amount of money people can get for being injured on the job is greater than it used to be. I started at $135 a week. And now the maximum in Georgia is $800 a week. It's 2/3 of a person's average weekly wage, up to a maximum of $800 per week. Now, that does make us one of the lower maximum rates in the country. We're probably in the bottom. We're definitely in the 40s and probably even 45 or higher in terms of the lowest maximum TTD, temporary total disability benefits, which is what you get for missing time from work. And we have a low maximum. One thing that has stayed frustratingly the same, one is that we continue to have a low maximum rate, but the biggest issue, I think, is medical care. And it's a never-ending struggle to get timely medical care for injured workers. We don't always get sent to the authorized treating physician properly. There's there's delay and denial. A doctor might recommend a referral, and then you have to go through a whole process. Whereas if you were doing that you get a referral, you'd contact the other doctor's office, you give them their information, you set up an appointment. Here, there's much more of a process, and there are a lot of ways to delay that. And I think medical is an ongoing issue, and workers' comp that has, I would say, stayed frustratingly the same. That to me has been the big one.
Okay. For someone who's never dealt with this before, what does workers' compensation actually cover? What do people misunderstand about it?
Well, to have a workers' compensation case, you need to be working for a company that has 3 or more people regularly in employment and be injured on the job. Now, there are sometimes questions about what does injured on the job mean. And of course, we all hear about, the guy who was moving furniture over the weekend and got hurt and then came in on Monday and tried to say that he got hurt on the job. And fraud, of course, is important, but it happens a lot less than people think. If you're ever injured on your job, you need to report it. And then if you are out of work, you will get lost wage benefits and medical care. Those are the 2 primary benefits that people get from workers' compensation.
So you talked about reporting the claim. What does that, what does the documentation look like? Writing a note at home, yes, it helps you remember the time and the nature, but what type of documentation should be given to the employer, and how does the process start?
Well, one thing is when you get hurt on the job, one of the real challenges is that everybody that you're injured on somebody's job, but everybody who you are relying on to help you works for your company. And some companies are better about it than others, but in some situations, you immediately feel like you're being put in an adversarial situation, and you're looking to the people, all the experts, everybody who knows everything, all work for the company. And you got hurt working for that company, and you're looking for that company to take care of you. Now, there are companies that will do what they should, get you to a company doctor, get everything, get an incident report filed, in your file, let the insurance company know about the injury and all those types of things. Other companies are not as good about it. There's just no 2 ways about it. And then you're really in an adversarial situation. And while that's going on, you're not going to the doctor in a situation where you really might need to go to the doctor, or at least to have, or certainly might at least want to get checked out, right. Or, you're taking off a few days from work, right? Which sometimes is all that's needed.
What are your early warning signs that you may be working with one of those companies you described that's not so good?
Well, I think a very important one is if somebody gets hurt and they go to their supervisor and say, I got hurt on the job, and their concerns are kind of sloughed, kind of dismissed. And then you come back the next day and they say, oh, just try to get through the shift, and they keep putting you off in terms of getting the process started. Then that they're not, then you feel like they're not really looking out for you, especially if you're at a bigger company that that you may have known other people who were injured who were already in that who are in the process, or where they go and fill out the necessary paperwork and there's notification and all of those things. When you see those things not happening, that you're having. I think those are the early warning signs. And the problem is, again, is that especially like if you don't have health insurance, how are you going to get medical care if your company isn't doing it? And then you don't get a lawyer involved because you're afraid about what's going to happen to your job, and it just becomes a real mess.
Okay. So what are the differences between a workers' compensation claim and personal injury? I think a lot of people don't understand the distinctions between those 2 areas. Okay.
Well, a workers' compensation case is one that arises out of and is in the course of your work. So if you're working and something happens that's related to your job, that will be a workers' compensation claim. In a workers' compensation claim, you don't have to prove that anybody did anything wrong. So we're much more concerned about the situation that caused the accident, because if it's arising out of your job, there's no fault. A lot of times someone's lifting heavy box and they hurt their back. Nobody really did anything wrong. You don't have to have negligence. It's just, it happened on the job. In a personal injury case, of course, you know, like our old torts professors would say, somebody has a duty to you, they negligently fulfilled that duty, and then there was an injury. So that would be a personal injury case where you would sue a third party. So that's a big
Okay.
difference.
All right.
Also,
Okay.
there are some cases that can be both. For example, if I was delivering something for my company and I was sitting at a red light and somebody else ran into me and I hurt myself, I would have a personal injury case against the person who hit me for the auto accident, but I would have a workers' comp case against my company because I got injured while on the job. And one thing we do, and you can who people know what's going on workers' comp, is to coordinate that to make sure that most of the money gets into the pockets of of our client and not just one insurance company giving money to the other.
All right.
So
All right.
that's to be, if you get hurt while you're working, you need to talk to a workers' compensation lawyer, because I've seen plenty of personal injury lawyers unintentionally. For example, they don't know that there's a list of doctors who are authorized to treat people in workers' comp. They'll send them to doctors they use in personal injury cases, where if they went to one of the authorized doctors, nobody would have to pay any money,
Uh, okay.
something like that. So your medical is controlled by the workers' comp system. So it's very important that if you get hurt on the job, to go to medical care through workers' comp if you can.
Okay. What about the scenario where I'm in a delivery truck, I'm the passenger, my fellow worker causes the wreck and I'm injured?
That's a great question. You cannot sue a co-employee for personal injury. In that scenario, assuming you and I are driving and we rear end somebody else and I get hurt, that is strictly a workers' compensation case for both people. That's one thing people don't realize. It's a workers' compensation case for the passenger and also for the driver, right? Because they got hurt while they were on the job and it arose out of, and it was in the course of their job. So both of them would have workers' comp cases. The passenger would not have a personal injury case because they were injured by a co-employee. So but I would say that if somebody had that situation, you want to make sure to talk to, as I'm sure you don't charge for a consultation, and it's worthwhile to talk
Correct.
to a lawyer for a consultation to get accurate information instead of listening to what your family or what Dr. Google or Attorney Google is telling you.
Right. Yeah. All right. So if someone is being, and you already mentioned the scenario of a shift supervisor saying, well, try to work through your shift. What about those doctors that may say, well, I'm releasing you, you need to get back to work, but the person really isn't ready or they don't feel like they're ready? How do we handle those?
Well, that's a really big, pressure point in a workers' comp case, right? Is when the doctor says you can go back to work. Is there a light duty job? Well, in workers' comp in Georgia, you are allowed to send your client for a one-time IME to a doctor of your choosing that the insurance company has to pay for. So just like, unfortunately, you have to kind of know which doctors you can work with. And the insurance company certainly have doctors they can work with, and you have to try to see if you can get some contrary medical evidence. The
Mhm.
problem, of course, is that the insurance company might not really care, and then you have to go to court. And in workers' compensation, we have our own courts, so you'd have to ask for hearing to get benefits reinstated, or if there was a light duty job that was offered and the doctor said you could do it. There's a lot of rules around returning to work, and I would just say to anybody who had a workers' compensation claim where their company is trying to get them back to work on a light duty job, that is a time to talk to an attorney, because there's a lot of complicated rules. That's usually if our clients are going back to work on a light duty job, I try to talk to them every day. Like at
Hmm.
the end of their shift, I want to talk to them every day. How did it go? Are we going to keep trying to work? Are we going to go out and get back in touch with the doctor? It gets complicated, and doing the process wrong can really put you in a situation where your benefits are cut off, which of course it puts you behind the eight ball.
Yeah. And that IME you mentioned, that's an independent medical evaluation done by a
Yes,
different doctor that may come up with a different opinion than,
yes,
okay.
yeah. Which it's the best thing you can do, but it's really a tough. The workers' comp claims are very medical, are very doctor driven, in my opinion, in terms of, you know, can you go back to work without restrictions? Can you go back to work with restrictions, such as you can't lift over 10 pounds? Then the company is going to try to get a job for you for less than, where you don't have to lift more than 10 pounds to keep you within the restrictions, get you back to work so that they don't have to pay the weekly benefits, and then try to get you back, back to work and off of workers' comp.
Okay. I know over the 4 decades of doing this practice area, you've seen many seriously injured people. Talk about the toll that it not just takes on them, but their entire family and extended family.
Well, one thing that I always try to convey to people, everybody always thinks that workers' comp clients aren't really injured, right? You always hear about, everybody's trying to fake it. But of course, when my clients come, I can't tell you how many people come to me and say, I really am hurt, but everybody else isn't really hurt.
Hmm.
But everybody else is saying the same thing about their case. So they're saying that about you too. I mean, I've had some very, one day, I've had clients where people, cases where people died.
Hmm.
I had a case where a man went to work one day, had two little boys, and he was driving a truck, and the truck fell off the side of a mountain road, and they found it all the way down at the bottom of a ditch, and he was dead. So that was obviously a terrible situation to have somebody come home. The police just come to their house. It's just terrible. And then, of course, the situations where people are severely injured, it becomes the focal point of the entire family. A guy who fell off of a scaffolding, who's now a quadriplegic. I mean, workers' comp is, he's been getting benefits for 15 years, and he has 24-hour medical care, and he's in a wheelchair. I mean, his entire life has turned out. A woman I represent for many years was in a car accident caused by her co-employee, like you were asking about before, within the first 2 weeks of her moving to Georgia and working. So she was barely making any money. So she gets a very small amount of money, and she's had chronic pain for 12 or 13 years and just cannot get back to work. So it's just, I mean, they're tragic situations, especially the really long-standing ones. I mean, it's just terrible. It's
Yeah.
just terrible,
Yeah.
especially if it's a primary wage earner, right? I mean,
Right.
$800, because one thing in workers' comp is there's no cost of living increases. So if you get hurt now, let's just say right now, just making up numbers, you made $100,000 a year, right? So that's just about $2,000 a week. You would only be eligible for $800 a week if you go on workers' compensation. And if you don't have any other benefits coming to you, how are you going to, your family's income is going to be reduced by, just say after taxes, you have $600 or $700 a week, and that happens over time. I mean, it's really a devastating situation for all concerned.
As a mediator, you've seen lots of these cases and handled them that way. What do you think separates those cases that you seem to know are going to get resolved with your help, and those that are just not going to get resolved
Yeah,
without a court's intervention?
right. And I do some mediations kind of as a side like to my, and of course I've been in a lot of mediations as the representing the injured worker. I think the biggest problem I have, one friend of mine who does a lot of mediations, and he says the big problem was when the injured worker's been talking to the law firm of Google and Family, and they're talking to a lot of different people about the value of cases. And I mean, so I think one thing that's important is, are people looking forward? Are people trying to get past their workers' compensation case to get back to their life, or they become so invested in their workers' comp case that they're holding on for dear life to try to squeeze every penny out of it? I mean, which is sort of like a significant auto accident case, right? Some people become very invested in the case, and I recognize that people might not be able to go back to the job that they had before. Are they thinking about what they're going to be able to do in the future? I always find that once the client is talking about what are they going to be doing going forwards, the case is put into a bet. It's much easier to settle the case because they're looking forward instead of talking about how much they lost. Because workers' comp is never going to make up for what they lost. And the other thing is that in a personal injury case, a person is injured, they don't get any money until they get all of the money at the time of the settlement. Right there, past medical costs, their future medical costs, their lost wages, potential future lost wages, and then of course pain and suffering all add to the value of a personal injury case. In workers' comp, there is no pain and suffering as a measure of damages. Also, people have been getting benefits for 3 or 4 years, right? They're getting maybe the 800 a week. That's $40,000 a year. They could have had 3 or 4 surgeries. That could be hundreds of thousands of dollars. So when they're looking at the settlement, one thing I try to always do is there are forms that you can get from the State Board of Workers' Compensation that tell people how much money has been spent on their case. And I think that's very helpful because they might be talking to people, in terms of the value of the case, in terms of what would happen if it was a personal injury case. When I can say to somebody, your case is settling for $100,000 now, but look here at these forms that have been filed, $200,000 has already been spent on you.
Right. Right.
So if you're comparing a personal injury settlement to a workers' comp settlement, you have to look at how much money you've received over time. And you could say you've received $300,000 over the last few years. Right. I think that's a good way to let people know kind of the value of their case. I also think that the companies have a lot to say with this. I'm constantly amazed. A lot of times in mediations, right, you'll start off, especially now in the Zoom environment, where everybody will kind of come together for a few moments just to say hello and everything. And I'm constantly amazed at how many lawyers for insurance companies don't acknowledge that the person was hurt on the job, even in a case, even in a case in which the claim has been accepted. Right, because you could have a case that was accepted for workers' comp where the person has been getting benefits, and now it's time to settle, and the lawyer does not say, thank you, Miss, I'm sorry to meet you under these circumstances, Mr. Burrow. We know you were a 15-year employee of our company, and we're sorry that you got hurt on our job, and we're going to try to get you some money today so that hopefully you'll be able to move forward with your life. And I think saying that sets a much better tone. You have a person who's worked for a company for so long, and they feel like they've been cast aside, and when they don't, there's no acknowledgement of what they've gone through. I think that makes it harder. And I've had people who've just been very, it's just set a bad tone. We might get there. Right. We might get there eventually anyway, but it makes them feel like they worked hard for a company. They were just kind of cast aside. They got hurt through no fault of their own, and they still kind of were being, somehow it made them feel like they did something wrong.
Right.
So I think those are all important things.
Okay. Well, if anyone's listening right now, they feel overwhelmed after a workplace injury, what's the first smart step, first piece of advice you would give to them right now?
I would encourage them to call an attorney. I mean, most attorneys, our firm, it's not Gerber and Elkins. There's a bunch of great attorneys there. They'll all give you, if I can say the number, it's 678-802-8650. They all will speak to somebody for no charge. And they all, we have a good experienced team. I think they all do a great job. And I think you should call an attorney. It's free. That's the one thing people don't realize. You can call an, and this even from your practice, calling an attorney and hiring an attorney is not the same thing. If you're feeling overwhelmed, call, I know nowadays everybody wants to go to AI and see what AI wants to say, but AI at the bottom of everything says, this is generated through AI. We don't guarantee that we're right. And talking to somebody.
And as you've already said, Google and AI are more than likely going to give you misinformation.
I think a little bit. And also just to have a human voice of saying, this has happened before. Here are some steps to take. You begin to get a little connection with somebody, right? Because the lawyer for the injured worker is the only person looking out for that person, for the injured worker in the entire process. Everybody else works for either your company or the insurance company that's representing your company. And people come to us all the time where you can tell that they're not sure that they're really getting the right information because they know that everybody is working for the company. And that's why I think the companies that do a good job and get people into the system, get them, promptly to a doctor, get the checks started promptly and all those things, do a much better job of, honestly, of keeping me out of the case because the company the injured person feels like the company is treating them properly. It's when people do not feel like they're being treated properly, especially the delay in the first medical. That's always the big thing. But imagine if you got hurt and it's 2 weeks after you got hurt and they're saying we're still looking into it.
Yeah. Yeah.
That makes you think they're really not, that makes you feel like you're not really working with your company through the claim and that they're adversarial to you.
Well, Tom, thank you so much for joining me. It's been extremely helpful, insightful. And yes, I did want you to mention your firm name again and the phone number where people might be able to find at least your colleagues.
Yeah. So it's Gerber and Elkins, the number 678-802-8650. You can just call there. You can say that you heard me on the podcast, and there is a great group of attorneys there who'd be happy to help you with whatever you need to do.
That's great. Again, thank you so much. I hope this has been helpful to our listeners and viewers. If so, make sure you follow us, share us, give us some 5-star Google reviews. We would greatly appreciate it. And again, Tom, we'll be catching up with you soon, okay?
All right, Darrell, and
All right.
let me know if you ever need anything else in the the workers' comp field. There's a lot of information on it, and it's been a pleasure being with you.
Yep. Thank you, sir.
You've been listening to Crashes, Claims, and Clarity with attorney Darrell Burrow, founder of Burrow & Associates and a trusted advocate for over 30 years. If today's episode helped bring clarity or hope after an accident, be sure to follow, subscribe, and leave a review. To connect with Darrell or learn more, visit legalatlanta.com. Join us next week for another honest, faith-centered conversation about recovery, rights, and moving forward after injury.